But people, this is the time when the initiative process is ripe for abuse, because we do not have the economy to support it right now. We don't have the economy to fight back.
Just a couple of quick points. Number one, I think everybody agrees that the initiative process is rife with abuse. We've all said it in different ways. And everybody hates the initiative process until there is something they would like to see accomplished that the legislature does not do for them. I think most voters are smart enough to understand that legislation is a scalpel, and they think the initiative process is a sledgehammer. But if you become sufficiently frustrated at the inability, the unwillingness of the state legislature to use that scalpel, well, a sledgehammer seems like a pretty reasonable second alternative. But I want to get to the point that you made about truth. I want to get to the point that you made about truth in advertising, because I think it's an important one. Bob a moment ago talked about initiatives that were used honorably. In his next breath, he talked about initiatives that are used with insidious goals. I would suggest to you that if you support an initiative, by definition, you think the process is being used honorably. And if you oppose that same issue, you think by definition that initiative is as insidious gets. So it's like, you know, when you hear the arguments in Washington or in Sacramento about special interests.
You're liberal.
What's a special interest? If I go to Sacramento or to Washington and I'm told, oh, there's special interests, what's a special interest? Well, a special interest is somebody who disagrees with me. That same person who's on my side is a righteous defender of the oppressed. So as we talk about reforming the process, I think it's worth realizing that people look at the same world through two different windows. But finally, on this truth in advertising question, you're exactly right. Truth in advertising is a casualty in ballot initiatives. It's a casualty in political advertising. You know what? It's a casualty in all advertising. I'm sort of naive. I saw an advertisement for this deodorant Axe. Any of you heard of it? I went out and I bought it. I bought cases of it. I thought this would turn my life around for me. Nothing happened. I went out and I bought this new soda. I saw this commercial on TV where these people are drinking the soda and they're playing beach volleyball and they're on their jet skis. It doesn't work for me. Maybe I'm using too much ice.
Let's ask you a question. Let's go back to the issue of the local issue on the telephone tax. Let's just answer that in the context of honor.
Well, I'm not going to defend the initiative any more than I would defend every politician who runs for office.
Give the good side of that argument, because I don't see it.
Well, Mike, I'm not going to defend it. What I would suggest, though, is that policing truth in advertising, whether it's a ballot initiative or a candidate or a deodorant, it's very, very difficult to do. And what I'd ultimately suggest is the best policing that's done is done by the voters. And it goes back to Joel's point. And I'll take Joel's point a step further. More than 90% of the initiatives that qualified for a statewide ballot in California, not just lose, initiatives that have money spent against them, not that are outspent, but initiatives that have any money spent against them at all lose. Proposition 8 last year was the first, or the year before last, was the first ballot initiative in almost 20 years in California to pass against significant financial opposition. Is there mistruth in advertising? Of course there are. But voters, like most deodorant users, are smart enough to ferret it out and make those decisions for themselves.
I want to, before I get to Steve on the signature verification procedure, one point though I want to make to supplement what Bob said about this Measure S. Something that frustrated me, Bob, with Measure S too, was not just the way that they did it, but they actually took the time and the money to study and come up with a deceptive way that would fool the voters.
That's why they needed the deodorant. Because, man, it just was horrible. I mean, this is a situation where, for those who don't know, a court in another jurisdiction, everybody has these texts on their cell phones, and some of that text goes to local government. Well, your cell phone, you're making calls today because, you know, you can get a plan, you can call my kid in New York or my assistant in Mississippi or whatever, and so where's the call generated? If you're located here in 818, but I'm in Mississippi and make a call, they take the tax, and they said that was wrong, and they made it illegal. And so the tax was being eliminated. And so now you have a campaign that says, oh my God, how do we preserve the tax? And they came up with this cockamamie deal to say, well, it was 10%, we'll reduce it to 9%, we'll lower it, right? Now, I guess the argument would be, well, we wanted to preserve the tax. But it was such a horrible way to deal with it. I just think when you deal with political speech, Dan, there's a different standard than commercial speech. I think there's an expectation in democracy. You're right, and I know it's hard to determine. And maybe it is through disclosure that you don't otherwise get. I'm not saying
But
that might not be a
politics,
solution.
politics is a blend of commercial and protected speech. I mean, it is a hybrid that is having gone through it. And I don't know if those of you saw the commercials.
Yeah, they told us true stuff about you, Trutanich.
My 90-year-old mother had to turn off the TV set. And at the end of the day, money is power. I don't care what anyone says. Money creates power.
Carmen, at the end of the day, you won the election, you're outspent by your opponent because you were a better person. Oh my God. It wasn't just money.
Well, I agree with that. I agree with that.
I thought it was a endorsement.
Good honest way to compliment yourself.
He would have beaten me. Money is power, but money does not equate to morality. And that's the problem. We're sitting here with this initiative process, and we're trying to figure out a way to make the issues that are taken through the initiative moral. And we've been trying to do that in this country for years and years and years in terms of leveling the playing field politically, so it's fair. How do you do that with the First Amendment?
Well, it takes one stopgap in essence. We try to protect ourselves through the initiative process by requiring a certain number of signatures. And then, of course, because if it's this many signatures and this percentage of this many people who voted, then it qualifies. Steve, this is something that, the signature verification procedure. You read these stories about, we got 60,000 signatures, but only 20,000 were found to be good. Is the signature verification process something that needs to be revisited in California? It seems to me, is there a better way maybe to deal with getting an initiative to qualify than just the signature process where you pay somebody $2 a signature? Has the internet changed things? Just kind of an open field about signature verification, and is this something that that you as a DA or in the future as Attorney General see as something that could use some reform?
I have relative confidence in the local registrar recorders in terms of the verification process. The numbers of signatures required is reasonable. Basically, if you are changing a statute via the initiative process, you have to gather 5% of the signatures of the last general gubernatorial election. You want to change the Constitution, you have to have 8% signatures of the number of voters in the last gubernatorial election, for example. And I happen to have this data here. It was to do a statutory initiative in 2006. You needed 430,000 signatures. For a constitutional initiative, 690,000 registered voter signatures. But the interesting thing is, the only ones who effectively gather that number of signatures are professional signature gatherers who are paid. And I've been told that all I need is $1 million, and you can put anything on California's ballot. The fact that you have to spend $1 million also weeds out the grassroots sort of movements. We've had a couple of exceptions. Prop 13 I thought was a grassroots, revolutionary sort of movement that had its own head of steam because of the abuses at that point in time. And the Three Strikes initiative, Prop 184, because of the death of Polly Klaas, it just so angered the voters at large. That was a grassroots movement, but those are the only two exceptions I can think of over time. So I don't know if there can be much improvement there. I think you'd look for other ways other than the number of signatures to improve or reform the process. And I don't necessarily have solutions there. I do like the idea of tying in any initiative, if you're going to spend money, you better identify the revenue source right up front as part of the initiative, or you don't qualify.
Is that an endorsement for California Forward?
Yeah, that's an endorsement. And the idea of that some states have of the Supreme Court reviewing in advance for its constitutionality, that sounds good, but I come from the old school where I like to have the Supreme Court making decisions when there's a true case for controversy, some facts that you can look at. So that pre-approval by the courts, I don't think is necessarily a good idea, especially when we've had courts led by Rose Berg.